The first time I ever felt like I had a home, I was 34 years old. Not a rented room, not a borrowed trailer on someone's back lot, not a couch someone let me crash on out of guilt or charity. A real home, mine. It had taken me 17 years to get there. I signed the deed with hands that still remembered what it felt like to sort boxes in midnight warehouse shifts, fingers cracked from winter freight docks. I'd slept in a trailer behind a scrapyard in Elko, Nevada, eating canned beans and praying the axle held through dust storms. I knew what rock bottom looked like, smelled like, tasted like. So yeah, buying that house? That was a moment. Quiet but massive. I didn't throw a party or make a post. I just stood in the kitchen for a long time, palms on the countertop, eyes closed, listening to the silence. It was mine. For the first time in my life, something was actually mine. So imagine the whiplash when, just 3 weeks later, my entire family showed up on my front step. No warning, no call, just smiling like they'd been invited. Zach, my little brother, the golden boy himself, stood out front like he was the one holding the keys. His wife Madison had her arms full with one kid, 2 more clinging to her legs, a 4th asleep in a stroller. Behind them came my parents, Carla and Greg, wearing their usual tight-lipped disapproval like it was formal wear. "Richie," Zach called, like I was still 12 and about to hand him the better half of my sandwich. "Wow, look at this place. You really made something of it." There was something off in his tone. Polite, curious, but underneath it, a calculation. He wasn't admiring the house. He was measuring it. And me? I stood there in the doorway, still holding my coffee, like someone who'd forgotten to lock the front gate at a zoo. "Thought we'd drop by," Madison chimed in. "We've been meaning to see your new place." She said it like I'd invited them, like this was normal, like this wasn't the same family that hadn't spoken to me in over a year. "Just wanted to take a look," my mom added, brushing past me like the threshold wasn't there. Nothing like family in a home. Funny choice of words, because something told me they weren't planning to leave. I should have seen it coming. The smiles, the compliments, the just looking around. It was all a setup, like someone casing a bank but stopping to admire the wallpaper. They moved through my house with the casual arrogance of people who think they belong. Zach walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge. Madison took a picture of the living room for decor ideas. One of the kids left a trail of crushed cereal behind him like he was marking territory. And my parents? They didn't ask a single question. Didn't offer a "we're proud of you" or "this must have taken a lot." Just wandered the place like they were inspecting a rental. I stood in the doorway of my own damn house, watching the people who ignored me for years treat it like a family Airbnb. "You redid the flooring?" Zach asked, crouching near the hallway. "Looks expensive." I nodded. "I saved up." "You always were good with money," he said with a weird sort of grin. "Living in that trailer must have taught you something." And there it was, the first crack in the mask. They weren't just visiting. They were remembering who I used to be. Not the man who owned the house, but the kid they overlooked, the teenager who disappeared at 17 and no one chased. The one who knew how to make do, how to go without. That night they didn't leave. Zach made up some excuse about it being too late to drive back. "We'll crash just for tonight," he said. "The kids are wiped." Madison gave me a look like this was already decided. And my parents? My mom sighed like this was all a burden on them. "Let's not make a big deal out of it, Richie. You've got space." I ended up sleeping in the trailer. Not because I offered. Because when I came back from getting extra blankets, I found Zach and Madison in my bed. "The kids needed the bigger room," Madison said, smiling like she was doing me a favor. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just grabbed a pillow and walked outside. I lay there in the trailer that night, staring at the ceiling, realizing something that made my chest burn. They never saw me. Not then. Not now. They just saw space. The next morning, I walked into my own kitchen and found Madison barefoot, flipping pancakes like she was the lady of the house. Zach was on the couch in a hoodie I hadn't seen since college. My hoodie. The kids had already scattered cereal again, and my father had claimed the recliner I bought last month as if it came with his name etched underneath. No one looked at me, Not really. They just existed like I was the one visiting. Coffee's out, Madison said without turning around. I didn't answer. I opened a cabinet empty. Another also empty. Where are my mugs? Oh, she said, finally facing me. We reorganized a little. Hope that's okay. I didn't respond. Because what do you say to someone who just rewrote the rules of your own home while you were sleeping in a 12-foot tin box? When I stepped outside to clear my head, I saw something else, a locksmith van parked halfway down the block. I don't know what made me check. Call it instinct. The locks were changed. My stomach dropped in that slow, delayed way that comes with betrayal. You don't feel it all at once, it seeps in. I knocked. Madison opened the door with that same suburban smile that had started to look more like a mask every minute. Oh, Zach meant to tell you. We had the locks changed. You know, just to be safe with the kids here. The old ones were kind of flimsy. You changed the locks on my house? I said slowly. Zach appeared behind her. Come on, Richie, don't make it weird. You've lived in a trailer before, you know how to live modestly. And we have kids. That's when it clicked. They weren't asking. They weren't waiting for permission. This wasn't about visiting, or a rough patch, or just a little help. They were moving in. And me? I was being quietly evicted from my own life. You need to leave, I said. Zach tilted his head. That's not very hospitable. You forged something, didn't you? I asked. A lease? Papers? You think this is yours now? He didn't answer. And that silence? It told me everything. I didn't yell. I didn't push. I didn't even raise my voice. I just turned around, walked to my truck, and drove straight to the station. The officer behind the desk looked up as I laid down my folder. Home title, I said. Deed. Utility bills. ID and a fake lease agreement someone used to change my locks while I was at work. He raised an eyebrow. Family? Unfortunately, it took less than an hour. I had the real ownership documents. Zach and Madison had a forged rental agreement with a signature that looked like mine if you squinted sideways and had never seen cursive. 2 officers came back with me, cruisers pulling into the driveway just as Zach was setting up a flat screen he hadn't paid for and Madison was rearranging my bookshelf. Madison's voice went shrill fast. You can't just barge in here. We have a lease. Not a valid one, the officer replied, calm and flat. My mother stood in the hallway like a matriarch watching her kingdom fall apart. This is cruel, she said quietly. Cruel. Not forging my name. Not changing my locks. Not shoving me back in a trailer like I was 17 again and didn't matter. No. The cruelty was me taking back what was mine. Zach argued. Madison shouted. The kids cried. My father didn't say a word, just stared at the floor like the whole thing was inconvenient. By sunset, they were gone. The officers watched as the last of their bags went into the car. One of them turned to me. You okay? I nodded. Yeah. Just tired. That night I sat on the edge of my bed, again, and stared at the walls I had painted with my own hands. They were clean. Silent. Mine. But it didn't feel like peace. Not yet. Because in the back of my mind I knew it wasn't over. They'd be back. I didn't hear from them for a while after that. Not directly, anyway. But silence? That's just a different kind of noise. I'd see Zach's posts online, pictures of their kids at some park, a caption about rebuilding after heartbreak vague enough to sound noble. Madison shared a meme about how family isn't always kind, and my mother commented with a string of sad face emojis and something about forgiveness. Forgiveness. That's rich coming from people who tried to steal a man's house while smiling at his coffee table. What they didn't know is I wasn't interested in playing the villain or the victim. I wasn't going to argue with a screen or post cryptic quotes. I was going to live. I went back to my routine. Warehouse work during the week. Fixing up the backyard on weekends. Dinner with my neighbor Frank on Fridays. He's 72, cranky, and the only person who never once asked why I lived in a trailer for years. He just handed me a beer the first time we met and said, "Long day?" That was enough. But underneath it all, I was bracing. Because Christmas was coming. And if there's one thing my family never skipped, it was showing up to things they weren't invited to. So I made a choice. This year, for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to spend the holidays waiting for a chair to be pulled out from under me. I invited the people who had been there. My friend Maria, who once let me sleep on her couch after a frostbitten night in a truck cab. Andre from the loading dock, who brought me soup when I was sick and broke. A few others like that. People who didn't see me as a spare part or a second thought. I bought real food. I decorated the house. Put lights around the porch. For the first time, it felt like something worth celebrating. And right on cue. 3 days before Christmas, I got the text. From my mother. We're coming over for Christmas Eve. Don't make this difficult. Not a question. Not a request. An announcement. But this time, I had a different kind of reply. I didn't answer her text. Not out of spite. Just clarity. See, when someone tells you who they are long enough, at some point, you stop arguing. You just believe them. So I let the silence hang. Let them wonder. Let them guess. Meanwhile, I got to work. Christmas Eve came fast. I cleaned the house top to bottom. Lit candles in every room. Hung stockings, not store-bought, but the hand-stitched kind Maria made last year, each with a crooked little initial sewn in. By 6, the house was full. Andre brought ribs. Maria brought her famous cinnamon bread. There was jazz playing on the old stereo, the kind that makes even bad memories feel a little warmer. And I stood at the head of the table, carving roast chicken, not turkey, because this year wasn't about tradition. It was about truth. Then came the knock. Right on schedule. I opened the door. Zach. Madison. My parents. All dressed like they were going to a church service they didn't believe in. Behind me, people laughed. Clinked glasses. Someone put on a Christmas hat and shouted, "Rich, we need more ice." Zach's eyes scanned past me into the house. He looked surprised. Confused even. "We thought we'd stop by," Madison said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't move. No invitation. My mother frowned. "Richard, it's Christmas." "Yes," I said. "It is. You're really going to turn away your own family on Christmas Eve?" Before I could speak, a voice cut through behind me. Maybe someone should have thought about being family before they tried to rob him blind. I turned. Uncle Don. He stepped forward from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel, that familiar steel in his voice. My mother's jaw clenched. Then my aunt appeared beside him. Then my grandmother, slowly stepping forward with her walker. And one by one, they filled in behind me. Not a crowd. A wall. For the first time in my life, I wasn't standing alone. There was a long, awful silence, one of those moments where the air goes still and no one's sure which way it'll break. Zach opened his mouth, probably to launch some speech about letting bygones be bygones or setting a good example for the kids. He always had a way of dressing self-interest in moral packaging. But Grandma beat him to it. "Enough," she said, her voice quiet but sharp, the kind that cuts through a room better than shouting. She stepped forward, her walker creaking against the wood of the porch. "You think you can do whatever you want to him and just show up like nothing happened?" Madison's eyes narrowed. "We didn't do anything." "Don't," Grandma snapped. "Don't lie to me in a Christmas sweater." That shut her up. My aunt folded her arms. "You moved into his house without permission. Changed the locks. Tried to gaslight him into believing he owed you something. And now you want cranberry pie." Zach looked like a kid caught stealing lunch money. My mother's expression cracked for the first time, a flicker of embarrassment underneath all that practiced frost. "But Don wasn't done. You treated him like garbage for decades," he said, pointing at my parents. "Ignored him when he was living in a trailer. Praised Zach when he could barely hold a job. And now that he's got something of his own, you show up like you never left." My father, silent as ever, took a step back. My mother sputtered, "We're just trying to rebuild a relationship." "No," I said finally. "You're trying to occupy one." They didn't move. Just stood there, hoping someone would crack. Hoping I'd do what I always did, back down, keep the peace, pretend it didn't hurt. But that man was gone. Behind me, someone lifted a glass and called to Richard. Applause broke out. Real, warm, unexpected. It echoed through the house and out onto the porch. And something shifted. Zach dropped his gaze. Madison pulled her coat tighter. My parents turned as if on cue. And just like that, they left. This time for good. They didn't slam the door. Didn't throw a last insult over their shoulders. No, this time the retreat was quiet. Controlled. But it reeked of something I'd never seen on them before, defeat. And I didn't chase them. I stood there on the porch for a second longer, just long enough to hear the tires crunch down the gravel, see the taillights blur into the night. Then I turned around and stepped back inside. The warmth hit me like a wave. Not just the heat from the oven or the fireplace, it was the people. The ones who stayed. Maria handed me a plate and smiled without a word. Frank gave me a thumbs up from across the room, mouth full of ribs. Andre was halfway through telling someone the story about how we nearly dropped a vending machine off a loading dock at work, and everyone was laughing like they'd heard it for the first time. I sat down at the table, right at the center, and it struck me, this is what family's supposed to feel like. Not something inherited. Not something you're born into by accident. But something earned. Built. Defended. Later that night, after the dishes were stacked and the last of the cider poured, I stepped outside for a breather. The cold nipped at my sleeves, but I didn't mind. The house glowed behind me, full, alive. And as I stood there, looking at the porch light, the window wreath, the cracks I'd caulked myself and the railing I'd sanded down to bare wood last spring, I felt something unexpected. Peace, not happiness, not triumph, not some movie-ending swell of orchestral closure. Just peace. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing validation from people who had no intention of giving it. I wasn't begging to be seen. I was seen, heard, respected, and more than that, finally free. The next morning I woke up early. Not out of habit, not because of some job or chore, just because I wanted to. The house was quiet again. But this time it wasn't that hollow kind of quiet. It was full. Like the walls were resting after holding so much life the night before. I made coffee. Real coffee. Not instant. Not the cheap stuff I used to stretch through weeks in the trailer. And I sat at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, and looked around. That table was a dented old slab I refinished myself. The chairs? Picked up secondhand and repainted during a heat wave with sweat dripping down my back. Every inch of that place had fingerprints on it, mine. No one handed it to me. No one gave me a home. They sure tried to take it, though. Funny how that works. You fight tooth and nail for something, bleed for it, starve for it, and the moment it starts to shine, people who never showed up for the dark suddenly want a key. They say things like, "We're family," or "It's just for a while," as if the memories of your loneliness don't count anymore. But the thing they never understood is, I don't owe them comfort just because they feel entitled to it. That morning I took out the trash, watered the porch plant Maria gifted me, rehung the photo of me and Andre from last year's barbecue. Us laughing, grease-streaked, holding up a busted lawnmower like it was a trophy. And then I did something small but final. I opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out the spare key. The one I used to keep just in case Zach ever needed a place to crash. I took it outside, stood over the storm drain, and dropped it in. Not out of anger, not revenge, just closure. Because if they want a way back in, it won't be through an old habit or a forgotten copy. It'll have to be through me. And I'm not the same man I used to be. January rolled in quiet, cold, clean, the kind of stillness that feels earned. I spent the first few weeks of the new year tying up loose ends, fixed a drafty window in the back room, repainted the porch railings, finally hung the shelves I'd been putting off since August. Little things, the kind that remind you this life, this home is yours. I didn't hear a word from my family, not a text, not a guilt-soaked voicemail, nothing. And honestly, that silence was the best gift they'd ever given me. But it wasn't just peace I was feeling, it was clarity. For most of my life, I'd chased something from them. Recognition, apology, acknowledgement that I existed outside of Zach's shadow, that I mattered. I used to think it would come in some big cinematic moment. My mother tearfully admitting she was wrong, my father finally stepping up, Zach realizing what he'd done. But real life doesn't give you those scenes. What it gives you, if you're lucky, is a moment where you stop needing them. I had that moment one morning in early February. I was sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, when my neighbor Frank came limping across the yard. He handed me a small, battered envelope. "Your mail ended up in my box again," he said. Inside was a Christmas card. From my aunt. Simple. Handwritten. "Proud of you, Rich, for standing your ground. You deserved better a long time ago. Love always, Aunt Margie." That one sentence, it landed harder than anything my parents had ever said. Because it came from someone who had seen me, not for what I wasn't, but for who I'd become. I taped that card to the fridge. Not because I needed the reminder, just because it felt like something worth looking at. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a rhythm. The kind of rhythm most people take for granted, but I didn't. Not after years of scraping by, living on edge, waiting for the next thing to collapse. I had a job that paid the bills, a home that was mine, and people who actually showed up when it mattered. That was enough. But sometimes the past doesn't like being left behind. It was a Saturday morning when it knocked again, this time in the form of a letter. Stamped and sealed. No return address. But I knew that handwriting. Madison. I stood in the hallway for a long minute, envelope in hand, debating whether to open it or toss it straight in the bin. Curiosity won. The letter was long. Too long. She wrote about how misunderstood everything had been. How Zach was just trying to protect his family. How things got out of hand. Then came the ask. Not for money. Not directly. But for grace. We're staying with friends now, she wrote. It's been hard. Especially on the kids. They miss the space, the warmth of a real home. And then the line that sealed it. I know you're in a position to help. Just for a little while. Maybe the trailer? Until we get on our feet. I read it twice. Then folded it back up and dropped it into the trash. No anger. No joy. Just finality. Because there's a point in life where you stop reopening doors for people who only walk in to rearrange your furniture and rewrite the locks. I didn't owe them shelter. Or silence. Or anything, really. They had made their choices. So had I. And mine came with boundaries. The trailer stayed empty. The door stayed closed. And for once, the decision didn't come with guilt. Just relief. Spring crept in slowly that year. It started with small things, buds on the tree out front, longer stretches of daylight, birds nesting in the gutter I hadn't cleaned yet. Life was moving again, but for the first time I wasn't chasing it. I was living it. One Friday, Maria stopped by with a 6-pack and 2 folding chairs. No one should drink alone on a porch this nice, she said. We sat there watching the sky shift from blue to gold to navy. She told me about her new job at the community center. I told her about finally finishing the attic insulation. It was simple. Easy. Real. No manipulation, no backhanded guilt trips, no pretending. Around sunset, she looked over and said, "You know, you're different now." How so? I asked. You're not waiting anymore. You used to always look like you were bracing for something. Like the next hit. But now? You're steady. I didn't say anything right away. Just took a sip of beer and let that sink in. She was right. I used to carry my past like luggage, heavy, always packed, always ready to run. But lately, I'd stopped packing. I'd even started leaving the porch light off at night. Not because I didn't want company, but because I wasn't expecting unwanted visitors anymore. They weren't coming back. And if they did, well, they'd find a different man waiting. One who didn't need their permission to stand tall in his own life. The trailer in the yard sat quiet that whole spring. No guests. No clutter. No chaos. Just a weathered old shell, empty, still, and finally serving the one purpose it was meant to, reminding me how far I'd come. I thought about selling it once or twice. Maybe scrapping it, turning the space into a garden or fire pit. But something held me back. Not nostalgia. Not sentimentality. It was proof. Not for them. For me. That trailer had been my whole world once, 14 feet of metal and silence where I'd cried myself to sleep more times than I cared to admit. It held the sound of my lowest nights, the ones where I wasn't sure I'd make it out of the next week, let alone the next year. Yeah? It was a monument. To survival. One night in early May, I got a call. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Later I listened. It was Zach. His voice was thinner than I remembered. Not desperate, but definitely cracked around the edges. "Rich, I don't even know if you'll hear this. Or care. But you were right. About everything. I didn't get it then. I thought I was owed something. I see it now. I really do." He paused. "I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I messed up. And you didn't deserve that. None of it. That was it. No request. No manipulation. Just words." For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just stillness. Because I realized something in that moment. I didn't need the apology. I was already free. That trailer was empty. That house was full. And my life finally was mine. I didn't call him back. Not out of spite. Not even because I didn't believe him. I just didn't need to. Zach's apology wasn't a door reopening, it was a chapter closing. And for the first time in years, I wasn't looking back. I spent that summer doing things I used to think were luxuries. Early morning walks with no destination. Saturday breakfasts at the diner where they knew my name. Helping Frank fix his fence just because he asked. No chaos. No family drama waiting to unravel me. Just a life. Mine. One afternoon I got a call from my Uncle Don. "Big birthday coming up," he said. "Your grandma turns 90 in September. We're throwing a proper one. She asked if you'd come." I hesitated. Not because of Grandma, I loved her. She was one of the few who had spoken up when it counted. But I knew what the real question was. Would the others be there? "She doesn't want them," Don said quietly. She told me that herself. "I want the people who made Richard feel like family," she said. Not the ones who forgot how to treat him. I blinked hard. Tell her I'll be there, I said. The party was small. Just the good ones. Grandma sat at the head of the table in her floral dress, holding court like a queen who'd lived through enough to earn every wrinkle. When she saw me walk in, she beamed. You made it, she said, voice cracking. I always meant to, I replied. I just needed to get home first. And as I stood beside her, surrounded by people who chose me not out of blood but out of love, I realized something. I hadn't been invisible all those years. I'd just been looking in the wrong direction. The day it all truly settled, the day the storm was finally over, wasn't some grand moment. It was ordinary. Quiet. I was standing at the threshold of my house. Just standing. No one was knocking. No one was taking. No one was asking me to be smaller so they could feel bigger. The porch was freshly swept. The light above the door flickered gently as dusk rolled in. And there I was, one hand on the frame, the other holding a cup of coffee, watching the sun sink low like it had done 1,000 times before. But this time I wasn't waiting for anyone to arrive. Not for validation. Not for approval. Not for someone to finally say, we see you, Rich. You matter. Because I'd stopped waiting. I had built something with my own 2 hands. I had been knocked down, ignored, used, and I didn't break. I outlasted it. That's what people like Zach never understand. They think survival means scraping by, that it leaves you bitter, small, hard. But the truth? Survival changes you. It teaches you to listen closer, to guard what's real, to plant your roots deep where no one else thought to look. I stepped back into my house and closed the door. No slam. No ceremony. Just a click. Final. That house wasn't just walls and paint anymore. It was proof that I'd been through the fire and didn't come out clean. I came out whole.